Greetings folks, welcome to the first ever Smackdown style review from Bob of All Trades. These two laptops are competing against each other. They were sent for review from HID Evolution, and this whole thing was their idea. HID calls me up and asks if I would be interested in doing a Smackdown. They originally wanted to send me 3 or 4 laptops. I declined. I said 2 would be plenty. Let me wrap my head around this, as 4 would likely take 4 weeks of testing and editing. Very likely it would consume at least 4 weeks of my life. So let's start off with this. Kudos to them, however, as they did state they really couldn't care less who wins. It is what it is. And I responded back with, well, that kind of makes sense. You really don't make laptops. You just make them better. You make the experience better, and not trying to make a mission statement for them, but essentially that is what they do. So with that said, let's rock the Smackdown. Both of these laptops come in at around 5 pounds. The Strix is just a little bit heavier at 5.2. They both feature the i7-9750H and the RTX 2070 max performance for a laptop at 115 watts. The icing on the cake being 240 Hz displays. All of this powered by 280 watt power supply units. The ASUS is a little bit smaller with sharper edges. The GE65 Raider, a little bit larger with rounded edges. However, when it comes to keyboard layout, trackpad layout, the ergonomics of both of those, the RGB that each one brings to the table, these are going to be things that will be individually loved and cannot be universally claimed as one being better than the other. These are all personal preferences. Okay, now that we got the basics out of the way, that stuff is going to be very personal. What you may prefer, what you may prefer, what you may prefer, it's going to be very different. Now, we have 12 rounds of Smackdown here. Let's go ahead and go over the first 3, and we'll come back and discuss those. Rinse and repeat. When it comes to benchmarks, the GE65 Raider gives us better GPU scores, while the ASUS Strix 3 gives us better CPU scores. This is thanks to the higher PL1 limit at 63 watts versus 55. Both of these are locked. However, when you combine a graphics card load with the CPU, both systems default to 45 watts. Therefore, with the exception of a few video rendering instances that would give us a little bit better performance on the Strix, overall gameplay FPS performance will generally be better on the Raider. However, the difference is only a matter of a few percent. Technically, we would still have to give the Raider here the win based on the fact that these are indeed gaming laptops with no identity crisis. Thermal performance on both systems with an ambient temperature between 70 and 71 degrees Fahrenheit. With stock paste, expect both the GPU and CPU to find themselves thermal throttling, even within 20 minutes of an intense title such as Battlefield 5. We up the ante here with liquid metal from here on out, and the Strix performs a little bit better on the GPU, Raider performs a little bit better on the CPU. Your mileage may vary on this with liquid metal, but they are both very close. Really difficult to declare a winner here until we look at the overall package. Core temperature differential on both the Strix and the Raider with liquid metal is showing a good sign. The Strix has about a 4 degrees Celsius differential, whereas the Raider has 5. The closer you can make this, the better fitment you have on the heatsink to the CPU and GPU die. Nonetheless, this is very acceptable. This one's fun. In real time, we are in the Battlefield 5 firing range. Over a 90-minute run on each system for maximum heat soak. You will see the GPU frequency on the Raider a little bit higher than the Strix. You will see the CPU frequency of the Strix a little bit higher than the Raider. FPS performance on the Raider was a little bit higher due to that GPU frequency. The wattage on both GPU and CPU were identical at this point. 115 watts on the GPU, 45 watts on the CPU. And here we have the Heaven benchmark loop running in the background at 1440p on both systems with a handbrake encode at 4K 60. Here you will see where that short-term power limit of 90 watts was kicked in on both systems. This is the highest peak temperatures, but this is something that will last a maximum of 30 seconds. After that, everything tends to settle down, and we will get the sort of temperatures that I was referring to earlier. 45 watts has leveled itself out on the GPU, 115 watts on the CPU. It's quite the mystery to me as to why the CPU frequency on the Strix is 200 MHz higher than it is on the Raider when both are locked at 45 watts. As you can see here, the peak voltage between the two is much higher on the Raider, but this only lasts for about 30 seconds when both are under that 90 watt load. Now, I am aware that many ASUS laptops do not undervolt quite as far, and it was at this point I thought, oh great, I have the answer. But let's have a look and see what the voltages look like when both systems are locked at 45 watts and running through that synthetic load that I had revealed a few seconds ago. So here it is. This is the stress on the system, just like we had before with Heaven Benchmark running in the background. The CPUs are both dropped down to 45 watts. The Strix has that 200 MHz boost frequency over the Raider, and here's the average wattages pulled after a few minutes. Basically, these are identical within margin of error. A few are higher, back and forth, but ultimately this averages out to be nearly identical. For what it's worth, this pattern is a lot more consistent than just revealing this here. This is not a one-off. I've always been under the impression that ASUS has some sort of CPU binning, or they're doing something that I am just not able to catch yet, because when it comes to undervolting, it's very typical for ASUS gaming laptops, especially ASUS gaming laptops, to be very cache sensitive. In other words, you cannot push the undervolt nowhere near as far on those laptops as I've been able to do so on other devices. So is ASUS getting some sort of CPU binning treatment, or is there something else going on? I don't know. Always fun. Let me know in the comments below. So we've already seen these two go back and forth when it comes to benchmarks. The Strix does a little better on the CPU, the Raider does a little bit better on the GPU. This is the out-of-the-box experience. When you're gaming, typically you're going to be GPU bound, typically, and with that said, the Raider's going to do a little bit better. But we could watch gameplay till we're blue in the face, and you're going to see it flip back and forth as to which one is doing better. That's going to be map dependent. That's going to be map location dependent. The difference between a couple of frames when all things are equal, to me, is not a deal breaker. And now, obviously, I know what you're thinking. Let's just overclock the GPU on the Strix, have the best of both worlds with a stronger performing CPU and at least an equal GPU. Well, there's two problems with that. One, they are both overclocked out of the box, and pushing the Strix GPU's core and memory too much further beyond what I got was causing some artifacts. Your mileage may vary. And two, the way the software is designed on the Strix makes it very difficult for tuners out there. More on that when we get to the software section. Make no mistake, I'm not trying to sound fussy. I'm trying to give the user the understanding of what it's going to be like to use each one of these laptops should they desire forking out the kind of cash that it's going to take to get their hands on one of these. We're talking $1,500, $1,600, maybe $2,000 depending on how you have these spec'd. Keep that in mind. But when it comes down to just playing these games, if I was not monitoring anything, they were both spectacular, and it is most definitely going to take more than a couple FPS for me to have a decisive winner for the Raider if I were to make a purchase today. Benchmarks favors GPU, favors CPU. What about thermals? They really do go back and forth. I found that the Strix responded very well to liquid metal, and overall, the core differential was a little bit closer on this than it was here. Perhaps the heatsink fit and finish on the cores, dies, GPU, CPU, respectively, was just better on this system. Maybe that's just universal. I have no idea. But overall, very impressed with the ground this was able to make, especially once liquid metal was applied. And when it comes to gaming, well, just turn off that Riva Tuner overlay and the difference in FPS between this and this is slim to none. Now when it comes to port selection and port placement, they both have a LAN, HDMI, USB Type-C, and 3 USB 3.1s. Now on the ASUS Strix 3, we have a single combo audio mic port. The MSI separates this. On top of that, the MSI has a SD card reader and a mini display port. One thing that should not be overlooked, the exhaust ports on both laptops, far superior on the MSI. It's now on the ASUS Strix, we are trying to exhaust 115 watt RTX 2070 on your right hand, which is the mouse hand, and I'm going to tell you, you can feel it. This particular Strix does, however, feature the Keystone, which is an NFC-enabled key for personal customization. More information on that in the description below. The panels on both laptops are nearly identical, 240 Hz, 3 milliseconds, 97% standard RGB. The brightness is within 3 nits and the panel's part numbers are nearly identical. The only advantages I would see of the MSI is it does lean back a little bit further, but when it comes to just overall gaming bliss and performance, ghosting, color contrast, you name it, this is an absolute tie. When it comes to battery life, both laptops are equipped with Optimus-only switchable graphics, and our 66 watt-hour battery of the Strix 3 handily beats the 51 watt-hour battery of the GE65. Big surprise. We get about 4 to 4.5 hours on the Strix, 3 to 3.5 hours on the Raider. Clear winner here, ASUS Strix 3. Port selection and port placement. MSI has this in the bag here, not just for the couple extra ports that you may or may not be able to live without. It is the exhaust on the right-hand side of the Strix trying to dissipate 115 watts of GPU heat onto your right hand. I promise you, you will feel that. When it comes to the displays, they are both equal. Do you need 240 Hz? That's a whole nother question. Some may prefer to dial down some settings to get that frame rate up, and a 2070 max performance at 115 watts is typically able to handle that across several titles. Maybe not the AAA ones, let's not fool ourselves. Even a 2080 Ti may struggle with that. Now, when it comes to the battery life, huge win for ASUS here. That extra hour of battery life, these are laptops offering portability. More battery life, the merrier, and that is a huge win for the Strix. All right, let's proceed. When it comes to build quality, there is a difference between this and longevity. I cannot test the latter, but I can assure you, upon immediate feel, the Raider feels more premium despite being 0.2 pounds lighter. The lid is stiffer, the deck is stiffer, and it is metal. On the back side of the ASUS Strix, way more plastic than you get on the MSI. There is a lot more plastic on the ASUS compared to the MSI. Hands down, it doesn't feel quite as premium. However, the hinge, how robust and overbuilt the hinge design is on our Strix 3 is something to make mention of. Again, longevity is not something I can test, but we cannot count that out. But upon 1 week of use, the immediate feel and the overall build quality in your hands and the flex test goes to the MSI just barely. When it comes to accessibility, how easy is it to get to the components for upgrades or new thermal paste application? The Strix will definitely take the win here today. With that said, you will have 2 ribbon cables to negotiate with. Be very mindful of this when you pull that bottom panel up. Have a look at where those are, and then fold the panel over to the side accordingly. The GE65 Raider has a lot of plastic clips that will be held into place. It will be very likely that you will struggle to get that bottom panel off, and upon doing so, maybe even break off some of those clips. Not to worry, there's plenty of screws that hold the bottom panel on. I've taken apart both of these laptops several times, not just these here, but several different models featuring the same chassis. Very likely that this is going to happen, but we have to give the Strix the win for overall accessibility regardless of those ribbon cables. When it comes to upgradability, our Raider has an extra M.2 slot. Everything else about the systems as far as memory and storage is equal, giving the win here to the GE65 for better upgrade capabilities. Okay, build quality, accessibility, upgradability. I can't test longevity here, okay? There's more metal on this particular laptop. You can't deny that. Most would associate that with better build quality, but the hinges on the ASUS are really good. And I've heard people complain about MSI laptops and their hinge quality. Admittedly, nothing recent, but that is still something to perhaps keep in the back of your mind. The hinges on this are some of the best that I have seen, very robust. Now, accessibility, easier on this until you tear those ribbon cables, and you're going to be very upset. Someone's probably going to do that. That's going to suck. You're going to have to call in, get some new ribbon cables, send it in for replacement, the whole thing. you're not going to be happy about it, okay? You're also not going to be happy about breaking a couple of clips on here, but guess what? You can put the computer back together at the end of the day. If you're careful and you pay attention, this will be easier to take apart. So, kudos to ASUS for that. But at the end of the day, if you need more storage, this is the only one to go with. Now, as somebody who creates content, a single M.2 and a 2.5-inch drive, I can get by. What do they make? Just 4 terabyte SSDs in the 2.5-inch drive for maybe $200, $300, somewhere in there. If you need to go down that road, you can. There is another M.2 here that's extra over this. It is what it is, and let's go ahead and proceed. When it comes to the proprietary software that's on each system, the ASUS Armory Crate software is far more refined, and it is a one-stop shop. You're able to control all the RGB. This will be per key on this unit as well. Now, this software is the lifeblood of this system. Without it installed, you will have zero fan control, no RGB control, and it's sort of a nightmare to use this system without it. Now, fortunately, with my experience using this software on several devices, it's really only let me down on one, which was the mothership. Here, it is very nice. You can switch between silent, performance, and turbo mode with the push of a button. Should you want to select Windows or manual mode, you will have to do these manually. With that said, however, tunability on this laptop is very challenging. Should you desire an overclock, setting that up, running this, and then you want to go back to silent, when you tick that box, it's going to be gone. There is some sticking issues here with software like this. Is it very user-friendly to the new person? Absolutely. It is wonderful, but when it comes to tunability, the enthusiasts out there that want to tweak, for one, you have to use this software, and two, tweaking and tuning beyond what the software is already set to do may find cumbersome, challenging, and frustrating to the enthusiast user out there. As for the proprietary software on the Raider, we have two pieces. You have the Steel series, which will control the RGB. I like how this is separate. This has been a very dialed-in piece of software, and I have not experienced any problems using this software in the several years that I have been creating content for YouTube about laptops. This is per key RGB. It's pretty simple to understand. When it comes to the MSI Dragon Center, if you have been following me for any length of time, even over the last few months, you probably realize that I'm not a fan of this software. It tends to cause more harm than good. On the Raider, it's currently working nicely, as I would prefer it to work all the time, typically. Just not the case when it comes to this particular piece of software. What I do like about it, we can set all of these Turbo, Sport, Comfort, Eco modes. We can leave those be. I will just let this stick at Turbo, and I have near silent fan acoustics right now, and when I want to max out the fans, I can do so at the push of a button. I can also set this to Advanced, and I can set the speed of the CPU independently from the GPU and at different speeds. This is pretty nice. It's never been a deal breaker for me, as I tend to run without this piece of software. I could tune the laptop as I see fit, and then when I want to max out the fans, I can do that at the push of a button. This is a very basic piece of software that has caused more harm than good based on my experience. Yes, it's currently working. It is nowhere near as refined as the Armory Crate, and I love the fact that I don't need it to get the most from this laptop. But when it comes to a simple, elegant, refined piece of software solution, I would find that the Armory Crate to be a step above the Dragon Center. But don't count out the fact that if you're an enthusiast, you don't need this and you can get great performance without it. Another huge win right off the bat. The speaker audio on this is at a whole new level of quality that I have heard in gaming laptops. this thing crushes the Raider for speaker audio. There is no comparison there. And already you might be thinking, better battery life, better speaker audio, I'm going with this, done. And if that's the case, go for it, because this thing crushes it in those two departments. Now the fan acoustics between the two, this is only 2 decibels louder than this one, but it's a different kind of sound. The Strix has more of a smoother whoosh sound, and this has a little bit more of a high-pitch static sound to it. Decibels are not created equal. You can have 55 decibels of 2 different devices, and they both register at that decibel, but they both sound different, so hopefully that makes sense. Now when it comes to the software, the difference between you being a dedicated enthusiast that wants nothing to do with any proprietary software and wants to use their system the way they see fit, then this is the guy you want to go for. But when it comes to that elegant software, it is refined, it is generally fire and forget. I could send this laptop to a buddy's house and they could just click the turbo button right there on the keyboard deck and get really nice gaming experience, acoustics, and overall a very satisfying experience that is well integrated into the system. And that is why I have to give the software win to the Strix, because it just looks like a generation ahead. But those that are enthusiasts out there that don't want any part of anything to do with that, you're going to want to stay away from this laptop, because the Armory Crate is a must, otherwise you lose power limits and fan control, whereas this works great, if not even better, as an enthusiast without the Dragon Center. So that's going to do it. What do you think of this Smackdown, this whole style of review? This did take a very long time, and what is equally as important is, which one would you prefer at this point? Because according to the poll that I made a week or so ago, there seemed to be a pretty strong favoritism towards the ASUS. And how do you feel about that now? I'd like to thank you for watching. This is Bob of All Trades, and I'll see you in the next video.